Welcome to another Explainer. Today we're looking at the metals that literally power our modern world. From that smartphone sitting in your pocket, to the hybrid car in your driveway, and even those massive wind turbines driving the green tech revolution, rare earths are absolutely everywhere. But what if I told you that the narrative we've all been fed about these metals, the desperate stories of impending shortages and global scarcity, is just completely wrong? Today we're going to unpack a fascinating geostrategic myth, and let me tell you, it's a wild ride.
So, are rare earths actually rare? Let's dive right into this. To really understand the massive geopolitical drama surrounding these 17 chemically similar elements, we decided to test a very basic assumption. I mean, the name itself, rare earths, implies we're running out of them, right? We're constantly hearing stories of global superpowers maneuvering to secure the last few deposits on Earth. But is that reality? Are the metals driving so much of our global geopolitics actually rare?
Well, the simple answer is no, not at all. As our source material directly states, rare earths are not rare. They abound in Earth's crust. In fact, many of these elements are actually more abundant than copper, and they're as common as lead. To put that in perspective, as of late 2015, there were more than 800 known, mineable, land-based deposits right here on Earth. So this sets up an incredible mystery for us today. If these elements aren't actually rare, why on earth has there been so much global panic? Why are countries scrambling and treating them like the ultimate scarce resource?
That brings us to Section 1, the 2010 market panic.
To solve this mystery, we have to look back at a specific historical incident that accidentally reshaped everything. Picture this. It's September 2010, near the disputed Senkaku, or Diaoyu Islands. A Chinese fishing boat literally crashes into a Japanese Coast Guard vessel. The fisherman gets detained. In retaliation, local military and port workers in a single Chinese port decide entirely on their own to halt shipments of rare earths to Japan. Now, this was not some calculated national embargo orchestrated by Beijing. Actually, Beijing officials were completely in the dark at first and had to urgently intervene to get shipments moving again by November. But the nuance of a localized dispute involving a rogue fisherman and some disgruntled port workers, that was completely lost. The international media cried embargo, and massive global hysteria instantly took off. And this brilliantly illustrates just how crazy things got. Just look at this massive spike starting in late 2010. Prices for elements like dysprosium and neodymium, which, by the way, are absolutely critical for green energy, they completely skyrocketed. We are talking about price increases of up to 2,000%. Now, keeping in mind that a single wind turbine requires roughly 800 pounds of neodymium and over 100 pounds of dysprosium, this sudden price explosion was literally devastating. Dozens of junior green tech and renewable energy companies were pushed right to the brink of bankruptcy, simply because they couldn't afford the raw materials they needed to build their products. When you look closely at these specific data points, the volatility is just staggering. Samarium jumped over 865% in just the fourth quarter of 2010. Cerium went up nearly 440%. This data definitively proves that it was speculation, market panic, and pure fear that drove the market to the brink, not actual geological scarcity. There were plenty of rare earths in the ground, but the sudden, terrifying realization of global dependence on China's supply chain shocked the entire world into a frenzy.
Moving on to Section 2, the new extractive frontiers.
So that 2010 market panic unleashed an unprecedented wave of global exploration. In the name of beating China, nations started pushing into some seriously extreme territories, and the list of new mining frontiers quickly became downright absurd. I mean, we saw intense lobbying to overturn a decades-old moratorium in Greenland's nuclear-free zones. We saw militarized geological expeditions dropping into the heart of Afghan war zones. There were even calls to evaluate extracting rare earths from ecologically sensitive indigenous lands deep in the Amazon. And if that wasn't extreme enough for you, the quest literally left the planet. Yes, you read that right. NASA, the U.S. Department of Defense, and a bunch of Silicon Valley startups began seriously planning the legal and technological infrastructure to mine the moon for rare earths. Now, I just have to point out the dark irony here. We are spending billions dreaming up ways to harvest minerals from a desolate rock floating in outer space, all while we literally throw away hundreds of tons of rare earths right here on Earth every single year in our electronic waste. It really highlights how completely disconnected this geopolitical strategy has become from reality.
Which leads us to Section 3, the true cost, sacrifice zones.
So, if these metals are geologically abundant everywhere, why go to the moon if we already have it here? Well, the answer lies in the dark reality of how these materials are actually processed. You see, the real issue with rare earths has never been finding them. The problem is what they're buried with. Mineable rare earth deposits naturally coincide with incredibly hazardous elements like radioactive uranium and thorium, not to mention arsenic, fluoride, and other toxic heavy metals. Separating the rare earths from these toxic elements is an absolute chemical nightmare. It generates tremendous harm to the surrounding environment. We're talking about radioactive wastewater, toxic gases, and severe epidemiological crises for the people living nearby, including tragically high rates of cancer and birth defects.
This brings us to a heavy but absolutely vital academic concept: sacrifice zones. Because processing rare earths is so devastatingly toxic, the global quest for these metals isn't really a search for the metals themselves. It's a quest to find places willing to bear the toxic burden. The global economy essentially demands that we find marginalized communities, far away from the centers of political power, where the destruction of local landscapes and human lives is deemed an acceptable price to pay for the greater good of cheap, high-tech gadgets. That whole scramble for Greenland, Afghanistan, and the Amazon, it's really just a search for new sacrifice zones.
Now for Section 4, an ignored green solution.
Here is where we arrive at the most frustrating twist in this whole story, because it really doesn't have to be this way. We actually have viable alternatives. Take a look at the Brazilian company CBMM. When the 2010 crisis hit, they bet that the world would be willing to pay a premium for truly green rare earths. So, instead of opening up a brand new, toxic mine, they developed breakthrough technology to extract rare earths from the massive piles of waste tailings they already had from their niobium mining operations. They successfully pulled high-purity rare earth oxides from existing waste, using recycled water, all while shrinking their overall waste footprint. It was a total paradigm shift. No new mines and no new sacrifice zones.
But this incredible green solution was completely ignored by the global market. Why? Well, the United States, the EU, and Japan took China to the World Trade Organization to force them to drop their export quotas. And the WTO actually ruled against China, which forced a massive flood of cheap rare earths right back onto the global market. Once those prices crashed back down, the financial incentive for sustainable recycling completely vanished. Major tech and defense companies just chose the cheaper prices over the environmentally superior product. We actively use global trade laws to return to the cheap, toxic status quo, suffocating green innovation in the process.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on today. We now know the scarcity of rare earths is just an illusion, but the toxicity of producing them is a very harsh reality. We have the technology to harvest these elements sustainably right from our own waste, yet our current economic priorities actively discourage it. So, as our demand for smartphones, electric vehicles, and green tech continues to skyrocket, we really have to ask ourselves, will we finally choose to invest in sustainable recycling, or will we just keep looking to the Amazon, the moon, and beyond to find our next sacrifice zone? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it makes you look at the tech in your hands just a little bit differently today.